Good to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Matt, for those who don't know me. Um, Looks like we don't have too large of a group, so I'd love to have familiar faces and some new Oops, faces. Sorry. Since we don't have an overly large group, I'd love to have a moment to just hear from each of you about who you are, where you're coming from, and your relationship to anthroposophy. So I'll invite that in a moment here. Um, this is our first session of our next reading group. We've done 5 books before this. Sorry, this is the fifth. We've done 4 books before this. We started 2 years ago with Riddles of Philosophy. Then we moved on to Philosophy of Freedom, Interdisciplinary Astronomy, and then most recently Occult Science, which we finished over the summer. And I have found these groups to be tremendously enriching and rewarding and deepening of my study of anthroposophy. And so for those who have been along for the ride, yeah, thank you. And thanks for coming back for more. Um, as usual, as we've done in the past, we record and live stream these so that others can find them in the future and sort of participate with us. I've had a number of people reach out, having seen the YouTube playlists of prior reading groups, and they go through one by one. And I think it's a nice gift. But I wanted to make all of you aware that I will be sharing these on YouTube. Um, a reminder that volunteers are always welcome to introduce the reading that we do each week. I'll do so today. Um, but do reach out via email in the future if you'd like to lead us in with, just 5 or 10 minutes of sort of a brief summary and what was evoked in you in reading these thoughts. These are very meditative letters that Steiner wrote to the Anthroposophical Society towards the end of his life. And so they're nice, sort of bite-sized um, offerings that I think I have found stir me at a deep level. Um, Phenomenon also invites you to do pop-up presentations. So if you have some other topic, some other ideas that you're developing and want to take an hour to share with us, also something we very much appreciate. You can see examples of that on our YouTube channel from the past. Um, the schedule for reading is on Substack. I will link you all to that if you haven't seen it already. I'm going to be talking about the first 37 leading thoughts, and we'll be reading roughly 20 pages each week. And you can find the exact schedule at that link there. So, yeah, with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd love to just invite everyone to briefly, just a minute or so, introduce yourself and tell us where you are and what your relationship to anthroposophy is and what you're hoping um, to get out of this particular reading. And so, yeah, I'll say I've been studying Steiner's work and growing every year over the years closer and closer to anthroposophy. I would say going back now 16 years or so. Um, I think I've especially been deepening over the last several years, in large part because of um, the support, the warmth, and the insight that's come from this group. And this particular text was one that Ashton and I spoke about. We had a few others in the running, but because Steiner wrote this almost exactly 100 years ago, we're coming up on the centennial of his passing, leaving the earth. Um, and we will actually catch up to the exact century mark in terms of the date that he wrote some of these letters in several weeks here. So it felt appropriate as we approach um, the date of his death next year, or the century since the day of his death next year. And it's a tremendously dense but comprehensive um, restatement of anthroposophy. And so I think it covers all the ground. So before I introduce the first 37 um, leading thoughts, I'll pause and invite others to introduce themselves. Anyone want to go first, or I can call on folks? Do you want to
Happy
go
to.
first?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm Jeff Barney. I'm from Flint, Michigan originally. I live in Saxpaw, North Carolina now. Right now I'm on a huge farm in Florida where my wife grew up, and there's a 100 person family reunion. I cook for a living, so I cooked for all of those people yesterday and the day before. Um, and it was fun. It's a real blast. As this has been, I jumped in. Was it Riddles of Philosophy that we did first, or was it?
Yeah, it
Uh,
was riddles.
yeah, I jumped in partway through that when I found out about it. I was just surfing around and found it, and was hooked right away uh, with this group, and I'm very appreciative of Matt and Ashton for making it possible. And it's been an incredible experience. And we're doing something with the internet that is what do you say, Aramonizing it, if that's a word. And I came to anthroposophy when I was 27, just a few short years ago. Um, and I was handed the book, The Philosophy of Freedom. And I just spent several years reading Nietzsche, and I was sort of hoping for something to come along that would sort of pick up where Nietzsche left off. And sure enough, Steiner's Philosophy of Freedom did that. And I've enjoyed every minute of this group and look forward to this one. This is so beautifully done. And at the end of his life, his mastery of form and process is such an artistic gift to us. And I'm thrilled that we're doing this.
Great to have you here, Jeff. Where in Florida are you?
Live Oak. It's in the middle of the northern part of the state where it's 75 and I-10 near where that they intersect. It's on
Okay.
the Georgia border.
Not familiar with that part of the state, but I grew up in South Florida, so.
Uh,
All right, who's next?
Well, I'll go next.
Great, thanks, John.
Hi. So I'm Joan. I'm completely new to this group. I see that my friend Rosemary is here. Rosemary first introduced me to you, Matt, and I joined your Substack and have been fascinated. And then recently, a man named Michael Draskovic showed up at a study group at my house, and I mentioned you, and he said, "Oh, you should know about this group." So So that's how I find myself here. So I live in Los Angeles. I first encountered anthroposophy as an adult when I was 21 years old through a teacher training course here in Los Angeles. And before that, I knew about anthroposophy because my parents were in the Ernst Kutz study group up in Ann Arbor. So I've had this wafting through my awareness for many, many years. But I would say that my work out of anthroposophy has been in Waldorf education. Um, I like was a consulting producer for a documentary called The Waldorf Promise, which was about the movement of how bringing Waldorf education into public schools. And I was instrumental in starting the first public Waldorf school in Los Angeles called Ocean Charter School. But I'm going to say my big question that in a way led me to anthroposophy and still is true of my relationship to anthroposophy, which was always, I love this stuff. It makes so much sense, but I don't want to be a true believer. How, what's a ground upon which I can stand that isn't that? So I have to say that these leading thoughts have answered that question in a way that hasn't been answered before. So I'm grateful to be part of this community today.
Thanks, Joan. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, just in terms of keeping the circle truly, authentically showing the aliveness and the connection, Joan and I know each other, as do Rosemary and I, through this really interesting educational initiative that is always in service of life and children. And I would describe it as a kind of fifth dimensional, intergenerational way of mutual learning communities that is doing amazing things with very little money, but is certainly deserving of much bigger enjoyment and access in sharing the things we're learning together. And this is all part of it, actually. So Rosemary introduced me to you, Matt, and I've been sort of in the wings and joining when I can. And right now, actually, I'm in Connecticut with my grandchildren. And I'm a longtime educator in public schools in English as a new language, and language education. So it always comes back to me about language, about metacognition and metalinguistic awareness, and then the organs of perception for true listening. So lastly, I'll just say I find myself being called to this strong feminine leadership role, expressing who I am, but it's very challenging in a three-dimensional world. So I'm here for inspiration. I know that it's all about imagination and intuition. I'm curious more and more about threefolding now. So thanks, Matt, for your scholarship and for your heart also.
Thank you, Lisa, for joining us.
I might as well finish the circle of friends. I'm Rosemary McMullen. I'm a longtime anthroposophist. I would say 25 years. And I was an English teacher in university, and also a writer and researcher. And I didn't come to anthroposophy until I was practically retired in my 50s. So it's been interesting melding my life experience with what I found in the society. And I'm delighted to have found Matt and Ashton and CIIS and the scholars there. I'm currently living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm originally from Chicago. So I'll pass it over to Jeff Corantier.
Thank you, Rosemary. Here I am. I'm in Guanajuato, Mexico. I've been living here a few years. I'm from Canada. And I've been with this group since the first book, The Riddles of Philosophy, and echoing some of what's been said about this group already. Yeah, it's kind of has really crystallized a lot of what I've studied in anthroposophy over the years of this group and the discussion and everything, and also even more so now, this piece we're starting into is, I think, as you said it, Matt, in so many words, it's kind of a meditative piece. But just for timing and where I'm at in my process and the process of this group, it's been kind of a big launching me to kind of a new meditative level, for lack of a better word. My background in anthroposophy kind of had two simultaneous beginnings. One was through our children who went to a Waldorf school, so that was kind of a real life introduction to how it looks in the real world and how some of these ideas come out. But also maybe even more so in terms of time and relative effort and everything else.
In my professional life is as a professional Heilkundler, which is, um, for a more familiar word, it has a lot to do with homeopathy, but it has a lot more in it. We get taught a lot of the anthroposophical principles at our foundational level, and so anthroposophy has been a constant study for me for some 25 plus years at the professional level. So yeah, this group, this reading and everything in between has been a lot of ongoing developmental process. So that's maybe what I'll say for the moment.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't want everyone to feel like they absolutely have to introduce themselves, but if you would like to, please. Anyone else want to volunteer?
Well, I can go next
Be
if it's
very
okay.
quick.
Sure, go ahead, Douglas, and then Karsten after that.
I can be very quick. I was aware of the previous reading, but I was not able to attend. I have read Steiner's work on Gouda. It was a while ago. And I'm trying to apply Whitehead as an eternal object to my other readings. Thank you.
Good to see you, Douglas. Karsten, please.
I can go. Oh, someone else.
I think Karsten was going to go,
Karsten.
and then Henry.
Okay.
It's please, Henry, you go first.
Okay,
I go.
sure.
Okay. My name is Henry. I grew up with anthroposophy. I've become a more serious student of it, maybe over the past 4 or 5 years. And I'm in a study group for the youth section that this guy Charlie Cross is in. And Ashton presented at my group, and I wasn't there. I'm at almost every meeting, but I wasn't there for that one.
Mm.
But Charlie told me about this group, and I was already reading Leading Thoughts, which he knew. So I'm really trying to do it like directly with, when Steiner was doing it 100 years ago. Like a bit of self-mythologizing probably because I was born on his death day. And I don't know. There's some it feels like significant somehow. I don't know how, but the timing of this reading is actually perfect because it'll put me just ahead and then I can kind of reread it. But I'm very excited to be here.
Great to meet you, Henry. Karsten, please.
Yeah, so my name is Carsten. I live in Denmark, and my path into spiritual science was through a Danish writer, original writer and thinker called Martinus. And he has some ideas that are, I think, closely related to those of Rudolf Steiner. So at some point I found this group on YouTube and followed it all through the different books they've been reading, and finally caught up with the group when we started reading the interdisciplinary astronomy course. So that's when I started. That's 2 books ago, I think.
You're muted, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks, Karsten. I was just telling people that you've done some pop-ups for us on Martinez that I'm grateful for because I wouldn't have heard of him otherwise. So you can check those out on our YouTube channel. Who's next? Any takers?
Sure. So go ahead.
We're also polite.
Leilani, you want to go ahead?
Okay, sure. I'm new to this group. My name is Leilani Lesnow. I'm originally from Racine, Wisconsin, and at a young age, I moved to Florida. So presently, right now in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I guess my relationship to anthroposophy probably started back in 2009, 2010. I wasn't completely wild about Rudolf Steiner's work at first. I questioned a lot of it. But as I read more, something just clicked and I fell in love with it. In 2013, I was looking for groups and organizations, anything to be able to relate to other people and study Rudolf Steiner's work. I couldn't find anything. I ended up going to the Theosophical Society of South Florida, located in Deerfield Beach, and they still didn't have anything Steiner there. But it was just kind of a coincidence because someone at that particular class mentioned Rudolf Steiner, and the facilitator was like, no one knows Steiner here. So, like, yeah, I don't think we can hold a class there. And I was like, oh, well, I kind of know Steiner. I haven't mastered it or anything. So they invited me to facilitate actually at the Theosophical Society. So I facilitated a Steiner spiritual science study group from 2013 until about 2019. I then became pretty sick with a serious illness and became kind of homebound. So I've kind of been just trying to heal here in West Palm for a while and just picking up Steiner's work again. And I just feel that it's very important that I stay engaged with Steiner's work. So that's why I'm here. I feel it's important to connect with others who are also interested in Steiner's work and just keep myself on track. And that's pretty much it. So I'm very grateful for this space and for everyone gathering here. So thank you.
Thanks, Leilani. Nice to meet you. Mark, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mark Zweifel. I live in San Francisco. I have been studying Steiner for 35 years, I think, at this point. The particular reading at hand seems to be the one that really requires a community effort. So I'm very excited to be able to participate this reading with a group. My prior exposure to it has been through Carl Unger's treatment in a book that is entitled The Language of the Consciousness Soul. So this will be the first time I'm doing it with live people. So I'm excited.
Good to see you again, Mark. Fenya, were you about to introduce yourself, please? Oh, I think you might either be muted or your mic is not coming through. Huh, I heard you a second ago, but now I'm not. While you work on that, you might have to select a different mic down at the bottom left. Is there someone else who wants to go in the meantime?
I
I can go.
Oh,
No, it's okay.
Alexandra, go ahead.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, I'm Alexandra. I just go by Alex. I'm an architect living very rurally, unusually rurally in Manitoba, Canada. And I found Anthroposophy and Steiner only just a year ago or so. And it's been like a coming home. It's been amazing. So I've just been working on the 6 steps in self-development along with meditation. Always been seeking meditation, but kind of the Buddhist mindful meditation never made sense to me. And now, it's turning into a real practice. So that's been amazing. And yeah, I'm very new to this, but I'm very dedicated. It's just hard to express, but yeah, I'm sure many of you can relate. If you can't, especially if you came for it late in life and you've been searching for something, just feels very good. So yeah, I'm just searching for inspiration and connection, and I am looking at how I can bring anthroposophy into my professional practice as well. And having not studied it, it's obviously a challenge, but yeah, I'm hoping to find a way to do that. Thank you. And thank you very much for this. This is amazing, beautiful, and what a gracious offering this is.
Well, thanks, Alex. Good to have you here. I'm not sure who's next, Raymond, or why don't you go ahead, Raymond? And then we'll check in on Fenya and see if she fixed her mic.
Okay. My name is Raymond Monroe, and I live on Martha's Vineyard, which is a little island off of Massachusetts. And I'm recently retired. I was a professor in visual and performing arts, and mostly performance, and mostly devised performance, which is a way of, I don't know what you call it. I was doing theater without plays in some ways. It was about incorporating a wide range of things. And so including, I did a devised theater piece based on the Steiner lecture of Facing Karma, which was one thing. And so I've been a student, I think, since the mid 80s, but mostly on the Platonist side, I would say. But I have followed this group for a while. I'm very impressed, and I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you, Raymond. Fenya, do you want to try again? No, still not working. Well, sorry about that. Maybe next time. Sometimes when you restart your computer, all of a sudden everything works.
I could jump in now.
Please.
My name's Alistair Monroe. I thought I'd better follow the other Monroe, Raymond. I'm calling you from New Zealand, and I've been delighted to find this group. It's my first joining of the group. I have been involved in anthroposophy for 50 years. I'm a retired teacher and social work administrator. The book I bought this book nearly 50 years ago, and it's always stayed on my shelf. I've been reluctant to get into it, and now the time has come. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to work with a group, and hopefully I will be able to inwardly, actively experience its contents together with you all. So greetings from New Zealand.
Thank you, Alistair. Wow, 50 years with anthroposophy and just getting to this book. That's very
Slow
special.
learner.
Especially we could do that together with you. Anyone else?
I could jump in. My name is John Bird, English, but living in Romania since 30 years. I met anthroposophy in when I joined the Campbell movement in England back in the early 60s. It took me some time to get into anthroposophy, but it was mainly through, I would say, an experiential path rather than a study path. I just now really started working on the riddles of philosophy, for example. It's something it was too thick a book for me. I didn't have time for it. But it was very much through the being in curative education, in special education. It was very much through the work with the children and our the co-workers' efforts to really understand the situation of each child, and that will be couched in the language of anthroposophy, and slowly through trying to meet these educational and situations and dramatic situations of people with sometimes severe needs, that I grew into anthroposophy slowly. So, and this has been my path, and I've been fortunate to be in Camp Hill, where we were a community. So I've been able to live anthroposophy together with other people since the 1960s. And now, in the last years, particularly in the last years since we joined up with the Mistec community, I call it a community, it's study groups, but through that, I've been getting back really to the study of anthroposophy. And last year when we had this group, and when we started earlier this year when we studied the what was it we were working on now?
Occult science.
Occult science. There, I was so grateful because I could wake up to it on a new level, understanding how I think this comes through you, Matt, and the Whitehead aspect of process. And this is always something, rhythm and process have always interested me because it's a way to get down out of the intellectual into something more living and artistic and creative. But grasping really what this process is about, as we did through the study of occult science, for me, that was a tremendous contribution. So I look forward to see what I'm going to get from this one. What new dynamic will come out.
I imagine so. Thanks, John. Anyone else? So interrupt me if you change your mind and want to introduce yourself if you haven't yet. I was just going to do one more piece of sort of housekeeping. After each session, I will post the recording on the Substack page, and if you didn't get a chance to share a thought, or it's the kind of thing that you'd prefer to write out, you can always chime in with a comment there on Substack. And just so it's clear, like it's, totally free to subscribe to the Substack page for Earth Fenomen. And if you're subscribed, you'll get emailed when we do updates and posts and future reading groups and so on. So, I think something that's come through in the introductions we've heard so far is the way that anthroposophy really allows for the head and the heart to be integrated. There's certainly so much in what Steiner has written about and the lectures that we have of his that speaks to the mind in a powerful way, deep, deep philosophical insight, but also he speaks to our feeling life. He speaks to my feeling life. There's a line in the Foundation Stone meditation where he talks about the Christ being warming poor shepherd hearts and enlightening wise kings' heads. And I think this warming of the heart and enlightening of the head is rare. I mean, you can find different approaches that make you feel really good. You can find other approaches that really spark your intellect and get the thoughts uh, stirred up. But to have the two together and not just running side by side, but really woven intimately together, I think is unique, and it's one of the things that keeps me and has kept me deepening into anthroposophy. But I think something that Steiner speaks to in these first couple of pages when he's explaining the purpose of these letters that he's writing is to sort of both keep the Anthroposophical Society, the general Anthroposophical Society, on the same page, so to speak, but also not to hold the group, the Society of Anthroposophists, so tightly that individuals don't continue to engage in a sort of free play with these ideas and with these practices. And so there's a need, I hear Steiner expressing, to balance freedom with an individual initiative, with the need to avoid a kind of fragmentation, and not wanting to allow anthroposophy to become just another platform for, egoic whims and opinions, right? So we want to understand this path as a relationship to a real spiritual being, and to allow that spiritual being to inspire us as individuals, so we can find a kind of harmonization between each of our creativity as unique, once occurrent individuals, and the sense of a kind of mission-driven association. And Earth Phenomenon is a kind of association. And I think of us sort of on on the wild fringes and edges of anthroposophy with a capital A. You know, we're not in any way officially associated with the Gartianum or the society, but sort of a space that exists in between that and the rest of the interested uh, public who maybe is just coming to anthroposophy or interested in anthroposophy but not sure what it's about, and also for those who have been here, who've been studying for 50 years or so. And I think in the age of the consciousness soul, right, where we're very prone to individual brooding and to be more concerned, which is appropriate for our time, to be concerned with ourselves more than anything else. It can be very difficult to form these types of associations and a shared sense of mission that brings us out of ourselves and allows us to focus on humanity as such and not just ourselves. And that's been one of the real gifts of this group. Anthroposophy feels like such a it's a karmic calling, obviously, and you each express that in your own ways. Some of us feel so deeply drawn to it and receptive to it. And, if you Google Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy, you'll see that many also feel deeply repelled. And there's a lot of people devoted to, not just criticizing Steiner, but really defaming him and trying to, hold up some of, often out of context, but some of the worst single statements that you can find in some of his lectures that um, get emphasized as though that's the core of his teaching or something. And so it leads to this tremendous polarization for people that know a little bit more than just about the surface details of who Steiner was. It's like either you fall in love or and it's not just that, or you run in the opposite direction. It's like, or you become quite devoted to rejecting, negating, make sure people stay away. There's a lot of that passionate response to this. And I think that just speaks to how karmic this is. And I really want to honor the mystery of either being called to anthroposophy or rejecting anthroposophy. There's got to be a deep karmic reason for that. And I think we ought to just honor that mystery. I don't pretend to understand fully what's going on there. But as some of you spoke to, you know, someone said, I don't want to be a true believer. And I really share that. I don't feel like anthroposophy is a religion to be believed in or defended. Um, Nor is it like a theory that we would want to argue for or against. It's a path. It's a form of devotion to the spirit of the human being that we each long to discover and allow to flourish in ourselves, and that we want to participate in a sense that's larger than ourselves. Um, and then as I wrap up the remarks that I'm wanting to offer here, I want to actually read one of these leading thoughts, number 20, because I think it speaks to this issue that's coming to a head, I feel, in a lot of the conversations that I'm involved in online among um, people involved in metamodernism, people interested in like the work of John Vervaeke, or who are trying to keep abreast of um, both natural science and the natural scientific understanding of the human being, as well as people who have this spiritual longing to understand maybe those aspects of human life that science can't touch. This question of freedom and the extent to which we can understand ourselves scientifically, as well as spiritually as free beings, I think really gets to the core of the so-called meaning crisis that more and more folks are talking about. So Steiner writes, this is leading thought number 20. For a right development of the life of the human soul, it is essential for the human being to become fully conscious of working actively out of spiritual sources in his being. Many adherents of the modern scientific world conception are victims of a strong prejudice in this respect. They say that a universal causality is dominant in all phenomena of the world, and that if the human being believes that he himself, out of his own resources, can be the cause of anything, it is a mere illusion on his part. Modern natural science wishes to follow observation and experience faithfully in all things, but in its prejudice about the hidden causality of man's inner sources of action, it sins against its own principle. For the free and active working, straight from the inner resources of the human being, is a perfectly elementary experience of self-observation. It cannot be argued away. Rather must we harmonize it with our insight into the universal causation of things within the order of nature. So, to say that the free and active working of our inner life, of our thinking activity and our willing activity, is a perfectly elementary experience of self-observation, um, is, as it turns out, a rather controversial statement. I've shared this with a number of people, online, and a lot of people like it, but a lot of people also have a visceral reaction against it and think that it's somehow offensive to believe that the human being is free and that this is an obvious feature of our experience if we just observe it. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to make of that because logically it seems to me that even to deny this, you're already presupposing it. That is to say, you're formulating a thought, which apparently you believe, to deny the fact that you have any freedom, uh, including freedom of thought, and it's a performative self-contradiction, and yet many people feel very driven and righteous in affirming that, and I think that speaks to the forces that are at play in our time and the rise of a certain materialistic conception of the world that is now grown so powerful that it can even occlude us from what should be a very obvious self-observation, that we're allowing this materialistic model of the world to stand in between even us and ourselves, much less us and the world. And I think that's obviously a very dangerous, precarious situation, something that Steiner doesn't mention yet, at least in these first 20 pages or so of Leading Thoughts, but he says frequently elsewhere, particularly around the time after the First World War, is that the thing about materialism is that it can make itself true. Like when more people believe it, that consciousness and thinking is nothing more than a kind of brain activity, then their thoughts literally become more brain bound. And so, and the life of the soul, withers more and more. And then this is the nature of the kind of participatory worldview that we're being invited into, that we could actually lose our capacity for soul spiritual perception and lose our capacity to commune with the spiritual world unless we cultivate these organs of perception, and that our whole species is going through a evolutionary bottleneck at the moment where um, vast numbers of people are losing the ability to do this, to maintain active soul spiritual life. And so I feel a sense of alarm about that and a deep sense of compassion. And I feel those forces working in myself too, right? This isn't just, oh, those poor people out there. It's like, no, this is a constant battle that I go through every day, because we're all immersed in this materialistic culture. And we can do a lot as individuals to strengthen our connection to soul spiritual realities, but I feel like being mirrored by others engaged in that struggle, and sharing insights along the way, and just being honest about what we're struggling with, I think is really, it's tremendously supportive to me. And so, yeah, I invite us all to share not only the insights and the clarity, but also the struggles, because I think there's something in that that we'll all be able to relate to. Rosemary, please.
I've been observing some of the online discussions you're talking about, and I so appreciate your presence there. And we need to keep all the channels open and keep talking to everybody. I appreciate your gentleness and diplomacy, and not cutting ties with people who are opposed to you. Yeah. And I hope that you can find courage and community here that'll bolster you up for having to go to the people, going to head on with materialist people. But you're making a difference with your responses, believe me.
Well, thanks, Rosemary. And I've enemies. I mean, there's some enemies that are terrifying, and I wouldn't um, say this about, but mostly opponents, enemies are a real gift, at least at the level of discourse. I really, really enjoy and feel most purposeful when engaging. Yeah, I try to be diplomatic, but with opponents, because that's where the real evolution happens in relation to these adversarial forces, both external and internal. And so, yeah. Lisa, please.
Thank you. There's a certain resonance that you're speaking to, of setting a tone of energy that is, I think, expressing the possibility of expansion that I feel is so much a part of what we're really speaking to, of a view of life and cycles and seasons and patterns that are in the more than human, intelligent universe that is constantly responding back and informing everything and every experience. And we're always having our own experience. But that layer of abstraction, Matt, that I hear you speaking to from the beginning, of this presupposition of there is this way and it's not for us, speaks to those layers of dimensionality that I feel the frustration in right now between this three-dimensional thinking. And then what I didn't mention in my introduction is as much as I spent time with K through 20 education, afterward I followed it with a feasibility study of using a mindfulness-based intervention that I adapted, sitting with elder, frail adults and people living with Alzheimer's and dementia. So people who apparently weren't there, or it was really just about other ways of expanding and ways of knowing that we are uncertain of always, except the stories that I can tell you were quite profound around soul and who we are beyond what we or society says we are. Some folks without language, but certainly leading very challenging lives. Some were Holocaust survivors. There were moments of joy that were shared that were never written in this research article of a feasibility study in a journal of gerontological nursing. I mean, that exists too, but these ways of knowing in Western science and spiritual science is now at this moment, I think, so key for that, modeling that very humility that Rosemary is aware of and mentioning that she feels and sees in the way you move in these circles and bring us together. And so back to this sense of hosting our capacities and who we can be with each other really matters right now.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Matt, please.
Oh, I'm new to this group. I didn't introduce myself. I'm person that lives in Los Angeles. I've been studying Steiner since the early 90s, and my background is in physics. So I'm a trained scientist, and my calling has been to reconcile really the customary thought forms that we find in science with anthroposophy. That's been essential challenge of mine. And Matt, this what you just quoted, what I thought of is, it's so hard for people today to see their own thinking. They always reference their thinking to something else. And one little thought I'd like to share, that I think explains one of the many obstacles towards seeing your own thinking is every night we disappear, and in the morning we wake up. And that simple fact can be profound for us. We can learn so much from that. But what people typically do is they think, well, I disappear every night, but my body doesn't. So people identify their thinking with their body. And that's very common. And that's just one of the many reasons that materialism is so prominent in the world today. So I just wanted to share that observation.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yeah, Steiner has a lot to say just in these first few pages about sleep, and it's the analogies to death and what happens with these subtler layers of our being. And it's something, yeah, as ordinary as going to sleep and waking up, um, night after night, morning after morning, that we just pass over without giving it much thought. That I think the threshold into uh crossing the threshold into a kind of perception of the spiritual world is not at all, I've come to feel as uh grandiose and bizarre and otherworldly as it might at first appear when you like hear words like that, but more ordinary. It's like right in front of us. The rhythms and patterns of everyday life conceal something just the other side of the surface, that's waiting for us to wake up to. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Alistair, please.
Thank you, Matt, for your introductory remarks, and some of the follow-up uh, contributions. I thought opposition is true friendship. In your participation in these groups, I imagine with Viveka and groups, I don't know which groups you're involved in, but they call it this little corner of the internet, and I imagine that's what you're involved in. So
yeah,
that's where opposition is true friendship is really useful. What your remarks stimulated me to think of was the third leading thought, where Steiner speaks about those who assume that the limits of knowledge derived from sense perception are given, and it seems to me that this what you called a performative self-contradiction can only really be that Gordian knot can only really be cut if people are willing to examine the or come into contact with these limits and really appreciate that there is this upper limit and want and feel the need to transcend it, to be the fish that actually leaps out of the water for a second or two. I grew up in a place where there were lots of flying fish, and that image lives with me at times. That seemed to me to be a really important leading thought in connection with what the points that you were making.
Mm. Yeah, and part of coming to terms with those limits really does require a careful study of modern epistemology and scientific method and really understanding the ins and outs of this materialistic worldview and not simply rejecting it, but we have to go through it and then out the other side, or through it to the, leap out of the water. Just to recognize that the soul has this longing, which is not at all satisfied by that type of intellectual knowledge. And to be able to take that longing seriously as more than just um, a kind of Freudian wish um, for to be resubmerged in the womb or whatever, but that actually that there's an evolutionary impulse in that, and to trust it, I think is where people fall short, because it's no longer just an intellectual thing that one could prove before one leaps into it. Like you have to feel your way into it and really have a sense of trust that it's a doorway. Um, yeah, so that's a question I think we'll continue to orbit around as we read these leading thoughts. Henry, please.
I'm in another group that's reading this book called From Normal to Healthy by Georg Kuhlebint.
Yeah.
And I can't paraphrase it exactly, but he basically is making in many different ways over and over the argument that you were making about how there's this like a self-contradiction in the materialist kind of deterministic understanding of the human being. And one guy in my group, he was insisting basically that no one actually believes that. And, no one actually believes that they themselves, at least, are determined in that way. Because it's basically an impossible thought. But then what I thought in response was basically like, maybe the result of that kind of thinking is mostly that we don't believe in the other. Like we don't, it's a subject object thing where we will always maintain just an intuitive sense of our own subjectivity having some autonomy. But it's really like the limiting the other to zero, more or less. Um, Believing this deterministic thing about the other person and the world altogether. And then I was reminded too of in G.K. Chesterton, Orthodoxy. He says something like he's talking about freedom and necessity, and like he says that the man on the street, like the proverbial man on the street, understands that the human being is determined to some extent and free to some extent. And it's really like just the fact that we have maybe started on the circuit from like thinking about this question at all, that we go through these phases of wondering if we're entirely determined. But I myself, when these subjects come up, when this particular subject comes up, I can't, it's like I have some void in my memory where it just goes, like, I can't actually remember the arguments beyond the fact that it's self-contradictory. And I should maybe just like write down some pithy little things to say, but I wonder, like, Matt, what do you do, or like, is there a place where Steiner actually addresses this instead of just saying it's self-evident? What's a way in, to like the argument if you're not gonna, regurgitate all of the philosophy of freedom or something? I just wonder what a way in with people is.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple, I suppose, and a lot depends on who you're in dialogue with, and um, what they will be able to hear, where the points of leverage are. Um, Obviously, usually doesn't work to just say somebody's being self-contradictory. That'll just make them more defensive, probably. But I mean, it seems to me that there's for natural science, for natural scientific knowledge to even be possible, like we have to take a step back from the fact that we know all these facts, and then we have all these models that systematically relate the facts and give us a lot of prediction and control over natural physical phenomena, and step back from that and ask, well, what are the conditions that make science even possible, like in the first place? And one of those is that nature is intelligible, and the other is that we as conscious agents are capable of forming uh, intelligent thoughts so as to perceive that intelligibility, and that we're capable of devising experiments and working out theories and equations. And, so to even come to the knowledge that the material world is causally bound and deterministic presupposes a certain kind of freedom of thinking and scientific consciousness that can't be explained in terms of any of those models that we're coming up with, clearly, because it's the condition that makes it possible to come up with them in the first place. So, yeah, I don't know if that's just a more elaborate way of saying the same thing I already said, but um,
Could I just add to that, Matt?
yeah.
You could bring it like, given that this scenario might be a, like kind of dialogue, you can bring what Matt just said to bear on the nature of dialogue itself, that there's some kind of mutual aspiration to come to some kind of coherency with reality, and just the fact that we have that value, and that we could also be in a slippage with it, in error, also suggests the same.
Mhm. Yeah. And there's a certain superficial understanding of freedom that I think we would want to avoid, where we think of freedom as something that I have, like it's like a power or capacity that I wield, like a tool or something. Um, there's no separation between my being and freedom, right? And so freedom is like what we're made of in a way, and how we make ourselves or unmake ourselves to the extent that we deny that we have it. Um, we lose it. That's the nature of freedom, right? Um, so yeah, it's not a possession. It's what constitutes us. It's one way of trying to grok it. But Jeff, please.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. Um, First of all, I think the way this is structured is a Goethean mastery of polarities. What he's doing is using the contractive aspect of the individuating process to do what to infuse the universal or the expansive, and calls for the circulatory rhythmic system as an example of mediating between the two. And that, like, any sort of oppositional argument to that would be unthinkable in a certain sense, unless you are one of Kant's children, and you think that we start with the expansive and we reduce it to that which is sort of controllable and manageable. In other words, uh, the presumption that our perceptions are the only way that we can inform our concepts, and then the concepts themselves become fragmented and contractive, and it's a death process that's necessary to go through if it has the life process in conjunction with that. And I think this section 18 through 22, that section of these really brings to full is, first of all, it's core to this 37, all 37. And the second is that it picks up this notion of what the goal here is, which is to bring the spiritual in the self to bear on the spiritual in the universe, right? And I would suggest, I guess, Henry, that if people would read this work, uh, um, and maybe with a background in a non-presumptive epistemology that isn't Steiner's, that they might come to something that transcends their own felt polarity and their own self-contradictions that they must feel. I mean, I know the feeling, as Matt and others have said. Honestly, we're children of Kant as well, and it's been a lifetime of me trying to wriggle my way out of that conundrum. And this is a psychoactive work that really helps, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree, Jeff. So usually we will try to end right at the top of the hour, but Joan, I wanted to give you the last word. But just moving
Oh.
forward, so everyone knows, we'll keep to an hour to respect everyone's schedules. And but Joan, please, I'll give you the last word.
I've been accused of that too often. Um, so thank you for this conversation. In my looking around, this corner of the internet, the meta-modern corner of the internet, I came across one person who posted, and at the top they had like a self-designated what they called woo rating, so that you could be warned ahead of time how woo woo was this post going to actually be. And he said, how far from the current consensus worldview? So that's the measure of view. I love that. The current consensus worldview. I like that phrase, along with materialism. And then in answer to the question, I think it was in letters 7 and 8, where Steiner says that spiritual science is not natural science, but a more radical form of empiricism. That really, really lit something up, a more radical form of empiricism. So it's empiricism, but not the empiricism that we're used to. And that has sort of made me feel less likely to run away when I enter into one of those conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Reminds me of something Johann Gottlieb Fichte says, the German idealist, very important for Steiner. He would lecture to his students and say, I want you all to stare at the wall. Now I want you all to observe yourself observing the wall. Who is now doing the observing? And so, it's not every day for most people that they become aware of their own thinking activity. And that's the first step, right? Is not to just observe in the way we usually think of empiricism, what's going on through our senses, but to observe the process of observation itself, and that doubling back makes us aware of um, of the I for the first time, maybe just in a fuzzy sort of hazy way, but that's the seed for further spiritual development. Everyone is capable of observing themselves observing, and then what do you do with that? I think it can maybe there's an experience of vertigo initially, destabilization. You start to feel the void that Steiner speaks of in these first couple dozen leading thoughts, and you have to fill that void with something, and that's the challenge. All right, so we'll stop there. Really, really appreciate everyone introducing themselves and sharing some thoughts and feelings, and we'll continue next week at the same time. And we're going to be reading up to leading thought number 75. So it's roughly around page 40 if you have this version. But and again, you can find the schedule of reading on Substack. We'll use the same Zoom link next week. Really lovely to meet new friends and to see old friends. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.